Good morning. Well, welcome to the First Universalist Unitarian Church. My name is Lila Hobson, and I'm happy to be a member of this congregation. Since 1858, UU Wausau has served as a vital voice for liberal religion in central Wisconsin. We are an intentionally free society that welcomes all people just as you are, regardless of age, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or economic situation. Wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. I'd like to extend this special welcome to anyone that is a visitor joining us today. After service, please join us for refreshments in the atrium. Carolyn, our membership coordinator, will be there to offer a tour or answer any questions if you have any. Between Sundays, we'd love to have everyone come to some of our classes or events during the week. It'll be a great way to supplement your life. That's all I can say. It's just a great way to grow your thought processes. So be sure to subscribe to the church's newsletter and follow us on Facebook or Instagram for updates. I do have a few announcements. Pride Fest is next Saturday, June the 1st on the 400 block. Bridging and Baccalaureate is next Sunday, June 2nd at 10:30 a.m. And on June 9th at 10:30 a.m., there will be the flower communion. And there's a description of that in your bulletin, so please be sure and check that out. We do have a few volunteer opportunities. There is a blood drive on July the 2nd. And the Caring Committee is also seeking volunteers to help with the memorial services. If you are interested in volunteering with us, please call the church or email the admin at uuwausau.org. As we begin our worship together, let us take a moment to extend peace and blessings to one another. Please rise as you can and greet your neighbors. As we begin our worship together, let us take a moment to extend peace and blessings, which we did. Dear friends, let us gather our hearts and minds for worship. Please join me in reciting the chalice lighting. It's in your order of service. We light this chalice for the light of truth, the warmth of love, and the fire of commitment. We light this symbol of our faith as we gather together. Please rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn, number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Good morning. The First Strawberries is a story that is adapted from a Cherokee legend, and I share it with you this morning as told by storyteller Joseph Bruchac. Long ago, when the earth was new, the Creator made a man and a woman at the same time so they wouldn't be lonely. They grew to love one another, and they lived in happiness for many years. One day, the man returned home from hunting to find that the woman had not yet begun to prepare their evening meal. Instead, she was picking wildflowers. He grew angry. "I'm hungry," he said in a cold voice. "Do you expect me to eat flowers?" Now she too grew angry, for she had spent that morning picking those flowers, wanting to share their beauty with him. "Your words hurt me," she said, "and I will live with you no longer." And with that, she turned to the west and walked towards the sun. The man followed. He could not catch up with her because her steps were so quick. He called out her name, but she didn't hear him. No matter how hard or fast he walked, he could not catch up with her. The sun, from its position in the sky, saw all of this and said to the man, "Are you still angry with your wife?" "Oh no," the man said. "I was foolish to use such angry words, but I cannot catch up to her to say I'm sorry." "I will help you," said the sun. The sun shone down on the earth right where the woman was walking, and raspberries grew. They were red and ready to eat. But she did not pay any attention, and she continued walking. The sun tried again. Where the sun shone, blueberries grew, and they glistened in the sunshine. But the woman paid no attention and continued walking. The sun tried a third time, and where its beam landed on the earth, blackberries grew. They were plump, they were dark, but she was so angry she did not see them, and she continued walking. Finally, the sun tried its hardest. It shone down in the grass right in front of her feet, and strawberries appeared. The woman stopped. She looked and admired their beauty, and then she stooped down to pick one. She took a bite, and as soon as she tasted the sweetness of the strawberry, she remembered all of the happiness that she and her husband had shared before their quarrel. "I must gather some of these for my husband," she thought to herself as she started picking. She was still picking when he caught up. "Forgive me," he said. "Forgive me my harsh words." And she answered him by offering him some of the sweet berries. That's how strawberries came to be. And Joseph Bruchac finishes his story by telling us that when they eat strawberries, the Cherokee people remember that we should always treat one another with kindness in our acts and in our words. Now, I really don't know about the accuracy of that tradition amongst the Cherokee Nation, but what I do know is that I think about it under the June sunshine when I'm picking strawberries. And now that you've heard the story, maybe you will too. There's no religious education classes today, so any families that are here, which I see mostly big kids, but whether you're watching from the family room or from home, or you're here with us worshiping, please join me in our first UU Wausau tradition, which is to sing our children's blessing song at the end of the Time for All Ages story.
Please join me in an attitude of prayer or meditation. Put your feet firmly on the floor. Take a deep breath. I share this morning words from the Reverend Eric Cherry. Eric Cherry is the director of the UUA's International Office, UU minister and lifelong UU. And Cherry writes, "The history is complex. The politics are intense. The fear and anger are overwhelming. And the future is unclear. But glimpses of a hopeful vision will not be bombed into oblivion by anyone. In prayer, we call to mind the peacemakers, neighbors of differing faiths, with different histories, with different politics, with different emotions, who find room for each other in their hearts, in their dreams, and in their lives. Those who hold firmly to a vision of peace and justice anywhere in the world, but especially today in Gaza. Spirit of life and love, be present with all who are suffering terribly from the violence in Gaza. Lift up the hearts of those who fear and inspire courage among the peacemakers. Be present with political leaders, ensuring a retreat from violence and a procession towards the peace table. Guide the hands of all those who are caring for the injured, the hungry, and the grieving. And open our own hearts to compassion. Remind us of our complicity and responsibility, and lead us towards generous engagement, and move us always towards a vision of peace. I invite you to take a moment for peace to find a place in your heart. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. I invite you to join in our meditation hymn. You may remain seated. It's number 1031, Filled with Loving Kindness.
The mission and ministry of UU Wausau is made possible by the generous support of its friends and members. You can place a gift in the donation plate as it passes by. You can also visit our website, uuwausau.org, to make a one-time or recurring gift with your credit or debit card. Thank you for your support.
Before I share this morning's readings with you, I wanted to express a greeting to Dr. Ryan O'Leary, who's with us this morning. Ryan has spoken, I think, 3 or 4 times before. He is at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point /Wausau/Marshall, I believe all 3 of those. He is within the philosophy department that his specialty is religious studies. And I personally am always appreciative that when we're looking for guest speakers and kind of wondering who we should invite, and I extended an invitation to Ryan, he's always so willing to agree to come up and speak to us. So thank you, Ryan, for being here today. And when I got a hold of him, I asked him if there were some readings he might want to do or have done during the service, and he passed on 3 to me. And he selected readings where the words are especially appropriate for the message that he's going to be sharing with us today from both Christian and Buddhist traditions. The first reading were words spoken by Jesus to his disciples in what was known as the Sermon on the Mount. And it was recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. It says Mark in the program, but I checked it and it looked to me like it said Matthew in the Bible. So Matthew is where this was from. These are familiar words to many of you, and what I'd encourage you to do is to really listen to them, to hear them, and take them in and think on their application to your life. And these are the words Jesus shared with his disciples in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, for a second reading, we transition to the Buddhist tradition, and these words from Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk and peace advocate Thich Nhat Hanh. He wrote these words in 1987. They're excerpt from a book called Being Peace. And don't let the Reagan reference distract you. These words are as applicable today as they were in 1987 when Han wrote them. And he said, "You may not be aware that your country has been manufacturing a lot of conventional weapons to sell to the third world countries for their people to kill each other. You know very well that children and adults in these countries need food more than these deadly weapons. Yet no one has the time to organize a national debate to look at the problem of manufacturing and selling these deadly things. Everyone is too busy. Conventional weapons have been killing in the last 30, 40, 50, I might add 60, 70 years very much. If we only think of the nuclear bombs that may explode in the future and do not pay attention to the bombs that are exploding in the present moment, we commit some kind of error. I believe President Reagan said that the U.S. has to continue to make conventional weapons to sell because if you don't, someone else will, and the U.S. will lose its interest. This is not a good thing to say. It is off course. This statement is just an excuse, but there are real factors that push him and push the whole nation to continue to manufacture conventional weapons to sell. For instance, many people will lose their jobs if they stop. Have we thought about the kind of work that will help these people if the weapons industry stops? Now, not many Americans are aware that these weapons are killing people in the third world every day. The Congress has not debated this issue seriously. We've not taken the time to see this situation clearly, so we have not been able to change our government's policy. We are not strong enough to pressure the government. The foreign policy of a government is largely dictated by its people and their way of life. We have a large responsibility as citizens. We think that the government is free to make policy, but that freedom depends on our daily life. If we make it possible for them to change policies, they will do it. Now, it is not yet possible. Maybe you think that if you get into government and obtain a power, you can do anything you want. But that is not true. If you become president, you will be confronted by this hard fact. You will probably do just the same thing, a little better or a little worse. Therefore, we have to see the real truth, the real situation, our daily lives, the way we drink, what we eat, has to do with the world's political situation. Meditation is to see deeply into things, to see how we can change, how we can transform our situation. To transform our situation is also to transform our minds. To transform our minds is also to transform our situation, because the situation is mind, and mind is situation. Awakening is important. The nature of the bombs, the nature of injustice, the nature of the weapons, and the nature of our own beings are the same. And finally, Thich Nhat Hanh's poetic expression of the duality of life and awakening that results in its recognition. An excerpt from his poem, "Please Call Me by My True Names." Don't say that I will depart tomorrow. Even today, I am still arriving. Look deeply. Every second, I am arriving to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with still fragile wings, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that is alive. I am the mayfly metamorphizing on the surface of the river, and I am the bird that swoops down to swallow the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear water of a pond, and I am the grass snake that silently feeds itself on the frog. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and my laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. Here ends the readings of the morning.
Good morning. Before I get started, I want to thank Randy for reaching out and inviting me once again. I want to thank all of you for once again allowing me to come and speak. It's always a very happy time, and I find it very nourishing when I come here. And the title of my talk today is Religion and Peace in a Militaristic World. I have to admit, when I first started thinking about what I might say today, it just never dawned on me that I would be speaking on Memorial Day weekend about peace and pacifism. But I want to start out by saying that I absolutely do honor the sacrifices of everybody who has sacrificed so much for this nation. I also think that on a day like today, on a weekend like this, when we're honoring those sacrifices, it's worth thinking about how we might build a world in which those sacrifices aren't so necessary and aren't so easily asked of our service members. So, like I say, with that, today I would like to talk to you about religion and peace in a warlike world. Of course, a topic like that raises any number of deep and thorny questions, and most of those I'm not going to have time to address this morning. But there is one question that I think will help us find our way through such a difficult topic. And that's the question, what is religion for? What is the goal? What is the purpose of the spiritual life? Why do people feel a need for religion in their lives? Now, it might seem like I'm avoiding one set of questions by pointing to even more obscure questions. After all, there doesn't seem to be any consensus on what religion is for. Some people might answer that religion helps us explain and navigate our world. Others might say that religion gives us hope in the face of uncertainty and death. And both of those answers are, in their own ways, true enough. But I would suggest that both explanation and hope function in the service of a deeper end. And that deeper end, I would suggest, is the call to moral transformation. The spiritual life offers us reasons, motives, and practices that can help to guide us in moral improvement, and that can offer us the hope that a better world is, in fact, possible. So if it's true that the spiritual life is, at its core, a project of improving ourselves and improving our communities, then that certainly has consequences for issues of war and peace. After all, most people will say that war is hell and violence is to be used only as a last resort. Most people, therefore, oppose war, at least in the abstract. And most people support whatever war their nation happens to be fighting at the time. In the early 1960s, more than 80% of Americans supported our military involvement in Vietnam. It was not until the late 1960s that disapproval of America's handling of that conflict dropped below 50%. And of course, today, the American war in Vietnam has become a symbol of unnecessary and mismanaged conflict. 2 decades ago, 90% of the American public supported invading Afghanistan. 80% supported invading Iraq. Those of us marching for peace were accused of hating America and supporting terrorism. 20 years later, the papers were full of stories examining how we got into those wars. Opinion writers openly wondered why our troops were still fighting 2 decades later. They conveniently forgot their own role in manufacturing consent. Today, Americans who criticize Israel's prosecution of their war in Gaza, a war waged using weapons made in America and gifted, not sold, gifted to Israel at a rate of $3.8 billion every year, and that's before all the emergency funding. Anybody opposing that today is branded by the mainstream media as ignorant at best or anti-Semitic at worst. In fact, arousing the public to support war, the war of the day, is always tragically easy. Arousing them to peace is ironically much more difficult. To be called a pacifist is almost an insult, like being called a coward. No less a figure than the Nazi war criminal Hermann Göring, Hitler's second in command, knew that the secret to promoting mass violence was to play on people's fear and people's patriotism. At the Nuremberg trials, Göring described just how simple a trick it is. He said, "Of course the people don't want war, but after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag the people along. Whether it's a democracy, a fascist dictatorship, or a parliament or a communist dictatorship, voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of their leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them that they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to greater danger." End quote. So it's easy to rouse people, the public, to support war. Peace is popular in the abstract and unpopular in the moment, and pacifism is radical. Yet the spiritual life calls us to grow as individuals and to make our communities more peaceful, more loving, more compassionate. And today let's take just 3 examples from Judaism, Christianity, and Buddhism. The Jewish scriptures make shalom a central value. Shalom means well-being, tranquility, prosperity, and security. The scriptures use the word shalom as the opposite of war. For example, when in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 we read, "To everything there is a season, a time of war and a time of peace," the Hebrew translated as peace is shalom. Shalom is presented as a divine blessing, and it is also presented as an obligation for God's people. We have a responsibility, a calling from God themselves to pursue justice, to create the social structures where all of God's children can flourish. In the Christian New Testament, the Greek word used for God's love is agape. Agape is unselfish love, self-sacrificing love. The Christian New Testament calls us to love God and to love one another, and it uses the word agape to name that love. This kind of love is not bound by circumstances. It seeks the well-being of others, even our enemies, and it asks nothing in return. When the scriptures say that God is love, they make loving kindness divine. The Buddha likewise made cultivating loving kindness an essential part of the spiritual practice. In Pali, the word for this kind of loving kindness is metta, and it includes ideas of goodwill, fellowship, and nonviolence. In this way, loving kindness is deeply connected to virtues of compassion. Loving kindness wishes happiness for others. Compassion wishes for others to be free of suffering. And metta does not ask whether the other is friend or enemy. In fact, the Buddha discouraged making those kinds of divisions in the first place. The spiritual path then should be dedicated to a practice of cultivating love, kindness, compassion, and peace. Of course, it's commonplace to the point of cliche to say that religion has been at the root of more wars than anything else, and that may be true. Certainly Christians have fought their share of holy wars, from the Crusades to the settling of Americas. Meanwhile, despite the fact that Buddhist scriptures routinely condemn violence in all forms, Buddhists have also resorted to violence and war throughout history. Even in the 21st century, Buddhist nationalists in places like Myanmar and Sri Lanka have used religious rhetoric to fuel resentment and violence against Muslims and other minority communities. And this is something I tell my students all the time. Whatever else religion is something else that human beings make and something that human beings do. Whatever else religion is something that human beings make and something that human beings do. And human beings are, after all, only human. It's telling, though, that for both Christianity and for Buddhism, religious justifications for war are late arrivals. The first Christians, for example, rejected military service, even at the risk of a martyr's death. They found an unconditional call to love and a prohibition against war in the teachings of Jesus. Not only did they see pacifism as a natural implication of Jesus' message, they also saw the soldier's oath of loyalty to the empire as a form of idolatry. It was not until the 4th century, when Christianity became an established Roman religion, that theologians like Augustine of Hippo began to develop theological justifications for war. What then do we do with all of this? People around the world oppose war in the abstract, yet are easily roused to violence by the rhetoric of fear and patriotism. Jewish, Christian, and Buddhist scriptures teach compassion and loving kindness, and we could also produce examples from all kinds of other religious texts. Yet religious people still commit acts of organized violence. The first thing to do is recognize that our religious identities can all too easily be hijacked by those who profit in one way or another from war, and to resist that. And we can maintain faith and hope that resistance will bear fruit, because, as the late Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh said, we just heard this, to transform our situation is also to transform our minds. Awakening is important. The nature of the bombs, the nature of injustice, the nature of the weapons, and the nature of our own beings are the same, end quote. That's just another way of saying that the goal and purpose of the spiritual life is moral transformation in ourselves and in our communities. The nature of the bombs and the nature of our own beings are the same, but we can change. We can become awakened. We say we want peace then, and if we're attentive to the spiritual virtues of loving kindness and compassion, we will be motivated to oppose war, which causes suffering, and pursue peace, which sustains happiness and well-being. Well, what then is peace? Peace is more than just the absence of war. Religious values of nonviolence are, of course, necessary for true peace. For in war, there can be no peace. But nonviolence is a negative expression. It names an absence. Peace, on the other hand, is a positive state of affairs. Peace is the presence of justice. Peace is productive, beneficial, fruitful. Peace involves nonviolence, that's true, but only as a necessary precondition. True peace names cooperative power and collective action. So if we're motivated by ideals of nonviolence, compassion, and loving kindness to pursue peace, what is it that we're pursuing? First, we need to seek out ways to resolve conflict without violence. This might seem like an idealism that's doomed to crumble upon its first contact with reality, but the 20th century has provided numerous examples of effective nonviolent struggles. The campaign for Indian independence led by Mahatma Gandhi is one example. The American Civil Disobedience Campaign for Black Civil Rights led by Martin Luther King Jr. is another example. We could cite dozens more examples, from Argentina to Poland to South Africa. Perhaps the most telling, however, comes from Denmark during World War II. We've already heard how Hermann Göring found it so easy to rouse people to war. But Hannah Arendt, in her book Eichmann in Jerusalem, shows how well-timed nonviolent resistance can bring those same people back to reason, or at least enough of them, at least a critical mass of them. When the Germans occupied countries, they often depended on the local leadership to administer the nation for them. Meanwhile, many Jews had escaped to Denmark in the early years of the war. In Denmark, the German occupiers attempted to institute the rules separating Jews from the rest of the society, such as the yellow badge Jews were required to wear. Hannah Arendt describes the result in this way. She says, "When the Germans approached the Danes rather cautiously about introducing the yellow badge, they were simply told that the king would be the first to wear it." Politically and psychologically, the most interesting aspect of this incident is perhaps the role played by the German authorities in Denmark, their obvious sabotage of orders from Berlin. It is the only case we know of in which the Nazis met with open native resistance, and the result seems to have been that those exposed to it changed their minds. End quote. The example of Denmark only makes the entire episode of the Holocaust more tragic. In Germany, the perpetrators of the crime could tell themselves that they were following the law of the land. They could call themselves patriots. They could sneer at the pacifists as cowards. But open, nonviolent resistance in Denmark caused many to return to sanity. They began not only to refuse orders from Berlin, but to actively sabotage the Nazi efforts towards genocide. So, nonviolence can be strategically sound. Violent, organized conflict arises because at least one side sees waging war as necessary, perhaps even good. Often we see the issues at stake to be of such absolute importance that any submission would constitute disaster. In such a situation, the strongest means available can be justified, even the mass slaughter that war entails. But nonviolent resistance is not submission. Nonviolent resistance can work because political power depends upon subordinate populations and institutions. When that support disintegrates in a committed, strategic, and organized way, then subordinate populations find that they have their own power to be deployed. Given the right motivation, organization, and commitment, then, nonviolent struggle can achieve goals of peace and justice. Of course, nonviolent resistance brings with it the risk of injury, even death. But that's no argument against it, for war brings the same risks. In any case, violence is not the only means we have to resist oppression and injustice. Given the right strategy, given the right commitment, nonviolence, compassion, and loving kindness can offer the spiritual and emotional resources we need to pursue peace. The second ingredient to pursuing peace in a time of war is to root out the causes of organized violence within ourselves and within our communities. After all, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, to transform our situation, we must transform our minds. We need to transform the conditions that lead to war into the conditions that lead to justice, well-being, and flourishing. What do our religious traditions teach us about the causes of organized violence, then? To begin with, from a religious perspective, the causes of war are less political than they are spiritual. From a more secular perspective, we might say that the causes of war are psychological, as long as our view of psychology includes the possibility of collective insanity. According to the Buddha, organized violence is built upon a foundation of ignorance, and that ignorance leads us into fear, greed, and hatred. We're ignorant of the interconnectedness of all things. We fail to recognize that what hurts one of us hurts all of us. We fear losing what we hold to be important, and in our greed, we turn to hatred and violence to secure an imaginary safety for ourselves at a terrible cost to others. According to the Hebrew prophets, war is a result of social injustice, and injustice is a result of ignoring the divine command to care for our neighbors as ourselves. According to Jesus, our highest loyalty should be to the God of love, and that loyalty should be expressed in love of one another. When our loyalty to a nation, or worse, to our own greed, gets in the way of that, violence is a natural result. Notice, too, that implicit in these teachings about the causes of war are lessons for the pursuit of peace. To transform our minds and therefore our situations, we need to recognize the deep interconnectedness of all things. We need to realize that there is no such thing as securing peace and justice for ourselves at the cost of other people's suffering. We need to allow compassion and loving kindness to be absolute values, and to use those values to guide us in the pursuit of justice, for it's only through justice that we can achieve well-being, tranquility, prosperity, security. And we need to render our highest loyalties not to a flag or a nation, even less to a leader or a party. We need to render our highest loyalties to the divine unity binding all things, in comparison with which national loyalties are secondary at best. The goal of the spiritual life is moral transformation, and that has deep implications for both the drive to war and the pursuit of peace. Real and lasting change requires deep changes in our attitudes and our motivations. As Hermann Göring recognized, it doesn't much matter whether the political system is a democracy or a dictatorship. So long as the people can be swayed by fear and patriotism, and so long as injustice is stronger than justice, support for war is always easy to muster. The most common reasons that people obey violent leaders are fear, self-interest, and indifference. Real, transformative spirituality can offer us the moral and emotional resources to overcome violence. In conclusion, I would like to offer one final observation drawn from the Buddha, and that's that our karma is never fixed. Karma just names action and the fruits of action. Karma is the accumulated moral weight of deeds both past and present. The goal of the spiritual life is moral improvement, and Judaism, Buddhism, and Christianity alike teach that the goal of moral improvement is building a society of compassion, loving kindness, and justice. We can change our karma today. We can begin to pursue compassionate action today. Thank you.
I'd ask you to please rise for our closing hymn. Music's in your program notes. Let there be peace on earth. Please remain standing. Ryan's indicated he'll join us after service at our coffee hour if you'd like to talk with him or give him any feedback on the message that he shared with us today. I'd ask you to reach out if you're near someone, hold their hand. If you're not near someone, reach out with your heart as I share these benedictory words from the Reverend 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and minds renewed, to the world that is waiting for you. Go out to that world to bring your gentle touch to those in pain. Go out to feed and house those in need. Go out to speak truth to those in power. Go out with courage to do the work which calls you. Go out now with your passion and faith to change the world. Please be seated. Enjoy the postal. We'll see you after service.